Hi, this is Keith Abell. Just wanted to shoot another blog post today. This one's in response to a video that I posted some time ago by Dr. Glidden called Cholesterol, a Necessary Component of Human Biology. One of the questions that somebody asked regarding that was, I thought that if I ate a high-fat diet in conjunction with a high-carbohydrate diet, it would increase my risk of arteriosclerosis. Is this wrong? You seem to be suggesting that I could eat a high-quality carb and fat in some quantity without inducing arteriosclerosis because there would be no free radicals to tear up the bends in my arteries. Is this correctly understood? Well, yes and no. We're not suggesting a high-fat, high-carbohydrate diet. It's a little bit more complicated than that. We are suggesting that the low-fat diet is contributing to a whole host of problems. For 60 years now, the medical community has been pushing a low-fat, high-carbohydrate, specifically high-grain, whole grain diet to help fight heart disease, cholesterol, and obesity. Now, if this type of diet were effective, then we should be seeing improvements in all three of these areas, but we have not. In fact, the results of long-term clinical trials of over 48,000 postmenopausal women that was published in 2006 in JAMA actually found that this type of diet does not significantly reduce the risk of heart disease or stroke. Yet the medical community continues to promote this type of diet. Now, I mentioned obesity as well. The low-fat diet does seem to be increasing to obesity levels as well. And I'm going to have another video coming out in the near future. But since this question was related to cholesterol today, I'm going to continue on with the cholesterol side of it. Now, I believe that this entire low-fat craze was actually designed and promoted by the pharmaceutical industry as a way to promote cholesterol as being bad and that it needs to be controlled by their drug. The first time that we actually saw data that showed their entire low-fat theory as a farce came when the medical community tried to disprove Dr. Atkins' high-protein, low-carb diet that even promoted butter in place of margarines because of free radicals in margarines. Now, a lot of medical professionals warned that the long-term safety of the high-protein diet would be questionable. They were concerned that these diets would lead to an increased cholesterol and cause long-term cardiovascular effects. However, after 1 to 2 years of trials were finished on this type of diets, they actually found that the high-protein, low-carbohydrate diet lowered triglyceride levels and increased the good HDL levels in comparison to the low-fat diets. What's interesting is that despite these findings, they still continue to warn that these type of diets will increase cholesterol levels. Now, the statin class of drugs has been the biggest money maker in history for the pharmaceutical industry. The dream of every pharmaceutical company CEO is to develop a drug that people will need to take for a lifetime in order to control their condition. The statin drugs have actually fulfilled that dream for many of the pharmaceutical companies. But the public has been denied one essential bit of information. The benefits of statin cholesterol-lowering drugs are no better than taking an aspirin a day. In fact, according to the pharmaceutical industry's own studies, the improvements in reducing heart attack and stroke risk are virtually the same following an aspirin regimen. We also are not being told that the link between elevated cholesterol levels, even elevated LDL cholesterol, and heart disease is much weaker measurement of it than the measurement of inflammation, especially the highly selective C-reactive protein. That's a protein found in your blood that gives us a sense of how much inflammation is going on. Now, latest studies show that inflammation is an independent risk factor for heart disease that's a whole lot stronger than any measure of cholesterol ever has been. I want to cite two studies of a study of two statin drugs, atrovastin and pravastatin, that was actually reported back in 2005 issue of the New England Journal of Medicine. The study found that patients with a low, highly selective C-reactive protein level had fewer heart attacks no matter what their LDL cholesterol level was, and that the people who had more heart attacks, their reactive protein levels was elevated regardless of their cholesterol levels. That means some of the people that had no heart attacks may have had real high LDL levels, while some of the people who had heart attacks may have had real low LDL levels. The only difference was the people that had the heart attacks all had a high C-reactive protein, where the people that did not all had low C-reactive protein levels. Now, the same thing's been found for stroke risk. Another recent study, the Prove It TIMI 22 study, examined patients on high and moderate doses of statin drugs. The study found that in both groups, there was no difference in the cholesterol levels of the people with stroke than those without a stroke. The only difference was that the stroke patients had a high C-reactive protein level, and the ones without had normal C-reactive protein levels. So inflammation seems to be the link here. Now, few physicians who prescribe statin drugs know that a link between elevated cholesterol levels and strokes has never been established, but a link to inflammation is strong and is supported by many clinical findings. Now, reported reduction in stroke risk for people taking statins has varied. One study showed there was no statistical difference in people with a stroke taking statins. 3 other studies showed anywhere from a 19 to 50% reduction of stroke on people taking a statin drug compared to people not. The lipid study, the CARE study, and the Miracle study, and that's the ones they like to focus in on. But newer evidence, however, suggests that the reduction in the risk of stroke in those studies was secondary to the fact that the statin drugs not only lower your cholesterol level, but the statin drugs also are anti-inflammatory. So it may be that the reason why these people had 19 to 50% reduction in the risk of stroke is because the statin drugs actually lowered the cholesterol, not the cholesterol, but actually lowered the inflammation. And that's actually the key, because we've already seen that the level of the cholesterol has no bearing on stroke. We know that the level of inflammation in the bloodstream has a bearing on the stroke. So why is there so much deception here? Why don't the drug companies and the physicians who promote the drug companies just change their policy and give statin drugs only to people with increased inflammation? Well, it all comes down to dollars. If they make lowering cholesterol their goal, especially a drastic decrease in cholesterol, and they can convince the doctors that everyone, even children, needs to take their lowering cholesterol drugs for life, then they'll have a whole lot more people they can sell their drugs to. Yet if they use the C-reactive protein or some other measure of inflammation as a measurement of when people need to take a statin drug, then that would eliminate 75 to 80% of the people that are currently taking the statins. And that's a massive loss of revenue for the drug companies. Now, alternatives to statins. Now that the statin promoters have admitted that inflammation and not elevated cholesterol is the cause of arteriosclerosis, we can examine ways to reduce inflammation in our bodies, and our blood vessels in particular, rather than using statin drugs. First, we'll examine why certain people are chronically inflamed. There's a great number of reasons for chronic inflammation. Most chronic disease conditions are actually associated with chronic inflammation. Some of the diseases associated with chronic inflammation are actually type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, chronic arthritis, many of the autoimmune diseases, infectious diseases, especially the chronic ones, abdominal fat, even aging. Now, high levels of free radicals are always associated with inflammation. The diabetes and metabolic syndrome, for instance, in both these conditions, high levels of free radicals and lipid peroxidation products are produced in those diseases. As these diseases progress, the levels of these destructive particles also rises. As a result, every blood vessel in the body is saturated with a constant outpouring of free radicals and lipid peroxidation products. This triggers an inflammation response in the walls of the blood vessels and oxidizes the fats in the walls of the blood vessels as well. Now, these oxidized fats act as an irritant, which causes the immune system to kick in then and to send its immune cells out to clean up the harmful fats. Unfortunately, they do even more harms by increasing the number of free radicals and lipid peroxidation in the blood vessel walls. It's important to remember that the most abundant oxidized fat in the arteriosclerotic vessels is not cholesterol. There's actually more omega-6 fats found in arteriosclerosis vessels than the cholesterol is. Now, since the omega-6 fats come from our diet and are not produced by the body, the drug manufacturers can't produce a drug to control that. They can only produce a drug that can control the cholesterol part of it, and that's what they've done. What most people don't know is that we eat a ton of oxidized fats. Studies have shown that diets that are high in polyunsaturated fats are high in oxidized fats. Since most American diets are high in omega-6 fats, such as corn oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, peanut oil, soybean oil, most of these fats are oxidized even before we eat them. Canola oil is a little bit different because it contains both omega-3 and omega-6, but it also can oxidize. And even the considered good oils, like olive oil, those also oxidize over time. We also know that flavonoids in vegetables and many of the fruits that we can eat reduce inflammation and neutralize these free radicals in lipid peroxidase products. Also, meats, even chicken, when they're cooked well done or burnt, because of the heterocyclic amines that are produced by the burnt meat, these also trigger massive free radical generation. Now, early on, the medical community cited studies showing that people who consumed high red meat diets actually had a higher incidence of cancer. However, recent studies have actually separated out how the meats were cooked, and they show that as long as the animal fat was not burnt, i.e. not cooked well done, there was no difference in cancer rates. It seems to be that the process of burning the meat, blackening the meat, is what causes the free radical damage. So red meat in general is not bad for you. It's the way you cook the red meat. It's also been shown that when just a few doses of MSG are fed to animals during infancy, the free radical generation caused by MSG and the lipid peroxidation that's caused by it at their young age are all increased in the lining of their blood vessels, and that lasts well into the animal's adulthood. Now, Americans consume tons of MSG and related additives every year. In fact, MSG is found in many foods under other names other than MSG because the way the federal government standards are set, as long as the MSG is below a certain level, they don't have to label it on there. In fact, they can label it as MSG free. These are all excitotoxins, and they all produce antioxidant enzymes in the arteries, and it's something consistently found in arteriosclerosis. All of this vital information is completely ignored by the medical community. Now, I suggest a diet that's high in protein, low in carbohydrates, and that we should avoid the landmines, and that's where the key is. You've got to avoid the oxidative damage coming from oils, burnt animal fat, nitrates and nitrites and preservatives, glutens. There's a whole host of these, and I'm going to post those in the near future. So, I hope you enjoyed this post today. I hope it answers some of the questions that you have. I would like to invite you to join me and become a healthy lifestyle champion. After all, what good is your health if you don't have wealth? And what good is your wealth if you have poor health? I'll see you again on the next post.